Hello everyone, and welcome to another brief overview of the presentation. So in this video, I want to sort of make sure that everybody understands what I'm looking for in the presentation. Because one thing I've found after doing this for a couple of years now is that there's a couple of places where people sort of deviate from what I would expect. And typically it has to do with this content part. So I just want to go through this in a little more detail and explain what each of these mean. So overall, the best way that I can say to approach this project is to think about the case study that you've picked. Think about it from a remote sensing perspective. And what I mean by that is put yourself in the mind of the researcher, not just about the ecological issue that you're investigating, which it is important, but more so from how you would approach that using remote sensing. Really dig into the idea of what imagery did they use and why did they use it. Dig into what did they do and why did they do it, right? Did they do some sort of data transformation? Like in the example that I went through, they converted their Landsat imagery to NDVI and PCA, and then they used image differencing to do the change detection, right? Think about why they did that and make sure that you understand, if they did NDVI, for example, what does that mean? Right? And NDVI, I would certainly expect that you know what that means. But for example, the example video I made, right, they used principal component analysis, right? That's that PCA. And you might not know what that means. And that's okay. But again, I would encourage you to reach out to me. Use the literature. Use the textbook. Because the case studies, right, they have a lot of information in them. But they're a case study. They're not really designed to teach you the technique, right? So they're not going to necessarily explain what PCA is. So please reach out. Make sure that you thoroughly understand, right? Describe the imagery. Make sure you know what imagery they're using. If it's Sentinel-2, if it's Landsat 8, if it's Landsat 5, if it's PlanetScope, right? If it's aerial imagery. Make sure you understand the imagery that they used. What are its dimensions, right? Whether it's spectral, radiometric, temporal, spatial, right? Make sure you understand the dimensions of the imagery and that you explain that. And that may not necessarily be provided directly in the case study, right? You may have to go outside to the websites, right? Use the internet, find the information. Right? Second, explain the image processing steps. Right? Again, get into the mind of the researcher. Figure out what they did. Right? Again, did they convert to something else like NDVI? Did they incorporate additional information? Right? Like, did they incorporate information from the ground? Did they take measurements? What are those measurements? What do those measurements mean? Did they incorporate other data? Why did they incorporate that data, and what does that data mean? Right? That's what this is saying. Show any critical figures. So this is going to be basically if there's a figure in there that is something other than a picture of a person standing next to a machine, you're probably going to want to put it in there. Again, if you go back to the video that I made, right, I included pretty much every single image that they included, and I explained what it meant. Right? I included the NDVI imagery, the NDVI difference imagery. I included the false color and true color imagery to explain visual interpretation. Right? I included their PCA imagery, and I explained through what each one of those was showing and how it was showing it. Right? Describe the figure. What if it's a data transformation and it's on a grayscale color palette? What do the dark blacks mean, and what do the bright whites mean? Right? What do those represent? Are we representing vegetation? Are we representing areas of change? Right? What are we actually showing, and what colors are we using, and how are we displaying that? And then finally, discuss the meaningful results. So this is going to be basically where after you've read through and you get to sort of the last couple paragraphs, and they're really wrapping it up and saying, hey, this is what we found and this is why it's important. Right? You can paraphrase that. Now the thing that I want to stress here, the vast majority of information, right, I'm going to repeat that, the vast majority of information for this presentation should be coming from the case study. right? You shouldn't have to go to Wikipedia. In fact, I would urge you never to go to Wikipedia. But you shouldn't have to go to Wikipedia for too much, right? Basically, use the internet to help you understand and explain the things that you don't understand about the case study. You don't necessarily have to go to the internet and find out all the information on hailstorm damage, for example. That's one of the projects, right? Focus on what the case study is saying, and then use the internet to help you explain it. Let me repeat that, right? Your content should come from the case study. Use the internet to help you explain the case study. Don't use the internet to bring in a whole bunch of other information and then ignore the case study. That is probably the #1 thing I've seen when students go through this project. Okay, I'm going to repeat that because it's very important. Your presentation should be based on the case study. 90% of what you talk about should come from the case study. That other 10% should come from the internet and should be information that is used to help you present the case study. Okay? Next part, presentation quality. So presentation quality. This is basically, does the presentation make sense? Is it accurate? Right? Do you have a good structure to it? Do you flow through, hey, this is the overall sort of idea, this is the data, this is what they did, and this is what they found, right? That's a good sort of logical flow. Did you actually do a good job on the PowerPoint? Right, if you go back and watch my example video, you'll see that what I tried to do was make the figures as large as possible so that you could see them well. I made sure the colors were clear. Snipping tool is your friend in terms of getting things to and from places. Do you have the relevant text on the slide, but not too much text? Right, again, you want less than 15 words on a slide. And if you have a figure, you want that figure to take up about 80% of the slide. And then finally, just the public speaking part. Right? I work really hard not to say I know it happens from time to time, but as a general rule, you tend to want to avoid those verbal slips. So things like right? A better approach, in my opinion, is if you feel like you need to say just breathe. Right? That's kind of what I just did right there. Now, to be fair, you can put in other words. I tend to say right a lot when I don't know what to say. But again, you want to avoid those sort of verbal slips. And then finally, is the presentation long enough? Again, 5 to 10 minutes. And the third part is basically just your generic grammar stuff. I'm not going to pound too hard on this, but again, if you have words in there, they should at least be recognizable as the words you're trying to say, if you have words on there at all. And also, the more important half of this is citations. Again, I would expect you to have at a minimum, the case study should be cited. You are likely to go outside of that again to get that 10% that helps you explain the case study. Right? You should cite those as well. So to recap, the idea here is that you're going to be submitting your video that's going to be appropriately content-wise, again, focusing on the remote sensing aspects of the case study. You're going to do a good job making the presentation. You're going to make it clear, clean, concise. You're not going to say and all the time. And then at the end, in the Word document, you're going to give me the information that I need in terms of your sources. So hopefully that makes sense. And again, if you have any questions on any of the content, if there's something in there that you haven't seen before that you just really don't understand, please reach out. Again, I would rather have you come to me first and really understand what you're talking about rather than just kind of muddling through and turning in something that you end up being penalized for later. So as always, if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.